President Obama has made his case to Congress and the American public on why they should back his anti-terror strategy. He said the US had lost its way on national security in the fight against terror under the Bush administration. Mr. Obama set out why it would be best to close down Guantanamo, but there's widespread concern this would leave terror suspects at large or see them transferred to US soil. This week, the democratically controlled Congress voted against funding for the president to shut Guantanamo. One former detainee is due to be tried in a civilian court in New York. Adam Brooks looks at the president's speech and its implications.
He spoke today at America's National Archive, flanked by the great documents of American democracy. The president's message then was clear. The US must return to fundamental political and legal values. The Bush years, Guantanamo Bay, and those interrogations were all an aberration.
Unfortunately, faced with an uncertain threat, our government made a series of hasty decisions. I believe that many of these decisions were motivated by a sincere desire to protect the American people. But I also believe that all too often our government made decisions based on fear rather than foresight.
He is, he said, pushing ahead with his plan to close Guantanamo Bay to bring some of those high-profile terrorist suspects to the United States for trial.
Part of the rationale for establishing Guantanamo in the first place was the misplaced notion that a prison there would be beyond the law. Meanwhile, instead of serving as a tool to counter terrorism, Guantanamo became a symbol that helped al-Qaeda recruit terrorists to its cause. Indeed, the existence of Guantanamo likely created more terrorists around the world than it ever detained.
Though some of these detainees will remain in indefinite detention without trial. Now, the prospect of closing Guantanamo has spooked even some in the president's own party. What will happen to all these detainees when the camps are closed? Nervous US congressmen don't want them on US soil, they say. And so they're withholding funding needed to close the camps down. Now the American right senses a chink in the armour of a popular president. Dick Cheney has emerged as an unapologetic critic, and today he was contemptuous of the Obama national security vision.
The administration has found that it's easy to receive applause in Europe for closing Guantanamo, but it's tricky to come up with an alternative that will serve the interest of justice and America's national security. I think the president will find upon reflection that to bring the worst of the worst terrorists inside the United States would be cause for great danger and regret in the years to come.
Dick Cheney is spearheading a political attack on the Obama administration, and he's using Guantanamo Bay and national security to do it. And President Obama seems to be learning that the detainee policy he inherited brings with it only grief. Adam Brooks, BBC News, Washington.
Well, the fight against terror came sharply into focus today on the news that 4 men were arrested in connection with an alleged bomb attack on synagogues in New York. The men, 3 American citizens and a Haitian, were arrested after a sting by the FBI in which they apparently believed they'd bought bomb material and anti-aircraft missiles to shoot down military planes. Greg Wood in New York has more.
The 4 suspects, 3 of them US citizens and believed to be converts to Islam, have been charged with hatching an elaborate plot to bomb civilian targets and shoot down military aircraft with missiles. The authorities said their motivation was a desire to do harm to America because of deaths caused by US operations in Afghanistan. But their every step had been monitored. The principal target of their alleged plot lies in a quiet suburban street.
The 4 men were arrested by federal agents shortly after they'd planted what they thought was an explosive device in a car outside this synagogue here in the Bronx, New York City's northernmost borough. In fact, the explosives were dummies supplied by an FBI informant after a surveillance operation lasting nearly a year.
The local community is still coming to terms with the shock.
I don't think I felt panicked. I mean, disturbed that these things are going on in our world, but it's not something that we don't expect on some level.
Agents from the Joint Terrorism Task Force kept a detailed log of the suspects' actions over several months, observing them as they allegedly travelled to buy guns, selected locations for attack, and visited a warehouse to acquire missiles and plastic explosives. But the authorities said there'd never been any danger to the public.
No one was at risk. This was a very tightly controlled operation.
Representatives from the American Muslim community condemned what they called false religious justification for violent actions. The federal authorities are investigating whether the men have any contacts with known terrorist groups. Greg Wood, BBC News, New York.
Guantanamo Bay should be closed within 1 year under a draft order expected to be signed by President Obama on Thursday. An ethical office. President Obama announces a new era of openness for his government and a pay freeze for senior White House staff. There are signs that President Barack Obama will shortly announce a timetable for closing the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center. A draft executive order circulating in Washington says the center should be shut down within a year. Well, let's get the latest on this. In Washington is our correspondent, Andy Gallagher. Andy, he certainly wasted no time. What does this executive order actually mean?
Well, he hasn't given this executive order yet. If he does, it comes as no surprise throughout his campaign. Barack Obama, now President Obama, always said he wanted to close Guantanamo Bay, and it seems almost certain that will happen, certainly if not Thursday, then certainly very soon indeed. And it means, we believe, that he will close Guantanamo Bay within a year. There's also reports that he will issue 2 other orders, one about the treatment of detainees and the other one about interrogation techniques, both very controversial under the Bush administration. But certainly this is yet again another turning of the page in history, distancing itself from the Bush administration. But then there are all those niggling doubts about what you do with the detainees. There's about 250 people still in Guantanamo Bay, so the details are yet to be ironed out. The order has yet to be issued, but when it is, it certainly doesn't come as a surprise.
Indeed, and by no means straightforward decisions to be made on Guantanamo. An alternative legal process to replace the military tribunals is one of those big issues.
There are many different issues, because if you think if these 250 men who've been held and haven't been charged and haven't been allowed legal representation so far, you know, there are questions about whether they could be tried in federal court here in the United States. That's very doubtful. There are other questions about where do you put these men, some of whom could potentially be very dangerous indeed. Do you put them back into the battlefield? Which countries will take them? All these questions have to be answered, but it certainly seems that Barack Obama will issue that order to close Guantanamo Bay within a year's time.